welcome. You're joining us for a deep dive into, well, a question that's really been stirring things up lately.
Yeah, this idea of whether a former president could actually seek a third term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're looking particularly at the recent buzz around Donald Trump and, what that might even mean.
And to really get into it, we've got this interesting debate between Michael Cohen and Tara Palmieri.
Right, from that pasted text piece. It kind of gives us a peek behind the curtain, doesn't it? Different takes on a pretty tricky issue.
Definitely.
So, our aim here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to unpack all that, get past the headlines.
Look at the arguments for and against the actual constitutional roadblock.
And maybe try to figure out the motivations people are talking about. Is it real ambition? Is it strategy?
Because it's not just like a news cycle thing. It potentially touches on, well, how American governance works or could change.
Core principles, really. So let's jump in. First big question, is this third-term talk a real plan or maybe just a tactic?
That seems to be the starting point, yeah. Palmieri mentions that New York Times report, suggesting some in Trump's circle think it's basically a strategy. Keep the base fired up, keep him relevant.
So using the idea of it for political leverage now?
Kind of. But then you have Cohen.
Right. And Cohen's view is, well, pretty different. He seems utterly convinced Trump genuinely wants to challenge the 22nd Amendment. He wants to run again.
He's very forceful, that quote. You cannot not for a single second underestimate this man and his desire to burn the Constitution to the ground.
Wow. That's intense. No room for doubt in his mind, it seems.
None at all. And it really shows the split, doesn't it? Because Palmieri, she doesn't totally dismiss it, but she brings in the reality check.
The how.
Exactly, the how. She points out, look, even if he wants to, the hurdles are, well, they're huge. You need that 2/3 vote, House and Senate.
Just to propose an amendment.
Right. And then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. That's a seriously high bar.
A very high bar.
Yeah.
And she also mentions the timing, right? The political clock.
Yeah, the whole lame duck idea.
For anyone wondering, lame duck is that period after someone's lost an election or announced they're not running again, but before they leave office. Their power often fades.
And Palmieri suggests Trump's in a similar kind of phase now, politically speaking, maybe limiting his window for something so drastic. Plus, there's always the potential for more investigations, maybe even another impeachment attempt down the line.
Adds another layer of difficulty.
Definitely. Which brings us squarely to those constitutional hurdles themselves.
The big one, the 22nd Amendment.
Yep. Put in place after FDR's 4 terms, limits presidents to 2 terms, period.
And it wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate choice, right? To prevent too much power accumulating in one person for too long. A core idea.
Absolutely. Baked into the system to ensure power transfers regularly. And like Palmieri stresses, changing that. It's meant to be hard.
That supermajority in Congress, the state support, it takes real broad agreement.
You can see why. You wouldn't want fundamental rules flipped easily based on, one political moment.
So does Palmieri think he even has a shot at getting that support in Congress?
She sounds pretty skeptical, very skeptical, actually, given how divided things are, getting that kind of bipartisan consensus.
Seems like a long shot.
A very long shot, in her view.
Okay, but then the conversation shifts a bit, doesn't it? Towards, well, maybe less conventional strategies.
Yeah, this is where Cohen's concerns get maybe more alarming. He floats the idea that Trump might try to just bypass the constitutional process.
Bypass it how?
Well, he even hypothetically mentions using the military, citing Trump's role as commander-in-chief.
Wow, that's a pretty stark scenario to even contemplate.
It really is, and it feeds into Cohen's wider point that Trump has been, quote, pressing and pushing constitutional norms to a place that we have never seen.
So the idea is maybe the desire for more power wouldn't follow the usual rules.
That seems to be Cohen's fear, that it might go beyond politics as usual into really uncharted waters.
And that's where the Putin comparison comes up.
Right. Cohen points to how Putin dealt with term limits in Russia. He didn't necessarily abolish them initially. He created the prime minister role to hold on to power.
A workaround.
Exactly. A loophole. Cohen suggests Trump might look for similar ways to, as he puts it, bend the terms as much as they possibly can.
So not a direct assault, maybe, but finding ways around the intent of the law.
Potentially. And the idea of presidential immunity gets mentioned, too.
Ah, right. That's been a recurring theme.
Cohen seems to think Trump might view expanding that as another tool, another way to exert power beyond the normal limits.
You can see how these different threads challenging the amendment, finding loopholes, expanding immunity, all kind of circle back to this core question of staying in power.
Definitely. And then there's the judiciary.
Yes, the talk about impeaching Judge Boasberg.
Yeah.
Palmieri had a specific take on that, didn't she?
She did. She argued it wasn't just like personal anger or trying to scare a judge.
More strategic?
Much more, in her view. She saw it as aiming to weaken the judicial and legislative branches fundamentally, to concentrate power in the executive.
And Boasberg, being a federal judge with lifetime tenure, makes that particularly significant, right?
Hugely significant.
Yeah.
If a president could just get judges impeached for essentially political reasons, well, what happens to judicial independence?
It really chips away at the separation of powers, the whole checks and balances idea.
Precisely. And they mentioned Chief Justice Roberts, too, reportedly voting against Trump in a case specifically to protect the Supreme Court's independence.
And it was apparently a close 5-4 vote.
That's what's reported. Which, if true, highlights how fragile some observers feel that independence might be.
So the underlying fear, voiced by both Cohen and Palmieri in different ways, is pretty profound.
Yeah, they basically articulate this concern that the ultimate goal, as they see it, is to, quote, rewrite the Constitution, making himself the dictator, the monarch, the supreme leader for his life.
That's a heavy interpretation, a really concerning one.
It is. But Palmieri also injects that dose of political reality again. Meaning that big power grabs, major constitutional shifts, they usually need backing. Public support, political support.
You can't just declare yourself dictator, basically.
Not in the U.S. system, no. And she uses the example of that fight with Judge Boasberg over immigration and gangs. Suggesting it shows they understand which buttons to push with their base, how to frame fights politically to get support for certain actions.
So there's a strategy even within those confrontations.
Seems so. And Cohen makes a point comparing Trump to Putin here as well.
How so?
He notes Putin already had a kind of authoritarian structure in place to build on.
The groundwork was laid.
Right. Cohen suggests Trump wouldn't have that same foundation in the U.S. It would be a much steeper climb, especially, as Palmieri notes, if his poll numbers are maybe slipping.
So the context is different.
Very different. Although
Yeah.
Palmieri does offer a bit of a counterbalance, too. She kind of suggests, well, maybe Trump has these delusions of grandeur, as she puts it, big ideas.
Yeah.
But there's a gap between wanting something and actually being able to do it within the system.
The reality check again.
Yeah.
What's possible versus what's desired.
Exactly. And she floats the idea again that maybe just talking about a third term is the strategy.
How so?
To avoid looking like a lame duck now, while he's still politically active, keep supporters engaged, keep the energy up. It serves a purpose, even if it never happens.
Interesting. A way to maintain influence.
Plausibly. And, history shows that changing the U.S. Constitution on fundamental things like term limits, it tends to need really broad agreement, way beyond just one party or faction.
It's not something done lightly or often.
Not at all.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we're kind of left with this real tension, aren't we?
Yeah, between what seems like a desire, maybe even an ambition by a former president to go beyond established limits.
And the very real, very significant legal and political walls that stand in the way.
And we've heard those clashing views through the Cohen-Palmieri discussion. Is it just political theater? Strategic posturing?
Or is it, as Cohen fears, a genuine drive to fundamentally change how American government works?
Big questions.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you to mull over. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the motivations, the strategies, the hurdles. What do you think are the most vital safeguards for our constitutional system today?
Yeah, where does that balance of power really lie? How important is public opinion, public engagement in making sure democratic norms hold up?
Especially when individuals might seem determined to test them. What are the longer-term ripples of even having these conversations, regardless whether a third term is likely right now or not?
Something important to consider.